welcome to our talk this afternoon. This is our parallel session on dysphagia workforce. My name is Caroline Bagnall. I'm Research Manager at the RCSLT, and I'm really delighted to welcome our presenters for today. We will get there with technology, and thank you for bearing with us. We've got a range of topics, and I'm sure it'll be a really thought-provoking afternoon. So the format for the session, we will hear from each of our presenters in turn and then take questions at the end. Now the questions go into the Q&A box, or can go into the comments, but ideally Q&A if that's possible. And I'll read out any questions at the end for our speakers. If the speakers are happy to mute themselves whilst others are talking, that would be really, really appreciated. And please do drop us a line if any technical difficulties during the session. So if we can then start with Helen, if you're happy with that, who's going to talk to us about addressing vacancy rates by supporting the SLT workforce. Helen, thank you so much for bringing this to us today, and thank you for stepping in earlier.
Unmute myself, that would be helpful. Okay, can everyone see those slides? Not managed to get it on a slideshow, but hopefully you can see that okay. Okay, that's the wrong slide. Let's go to the, I'm going to stop sharing a minute. Sorry, just bear with me. I think I'll go slow today. Right, we'll start from the top. Okay, so I'll introduce myself while those slides are slowly changing. So my name is Helen Vernon. I am the Head of Speech and Language Therapy, Stroke and Neuro Rehab Services at East Lancashire Hospitals Trust. When I submitted this abstract, I was working as the clinical educator for dysphagia in a secondment position across Lancashire and South Cumbria. Have subsequently changed jobs, which I'll talk about how that's changed things slightly during the presentation. So I'm really, really pleased to be here presenting to you all today. I'm going to talk about a collaborative approach to dysphagia education in the workforce. And this is on the background of us all being very, very aware of the current workforce challenges within speech and language therapy. RCSLT recently highlighted this following a survey of employers. And we now know that there's a 23% vacancy rate nationally in speech and language therapy. And this is particularly impacting those higher bands. And the impact of that is that we are having to recruit more and more junior staff into our services. And that is obviously having an impact on service delivery and how we support them. So in Lancashire and South Cumbria, we've actually got a vacancy rate which is above that national average. It's 25% in adult services. And we've seen unprecedented numbers of Band 5s employed within our region. In my service alone, we've got 9 Band 5s out of 40 staff. And they're numbers that we've never seen before. So that's had an impact across the whole of Lancashire and South Cumbria. Our current workforce are already feeling very stretched. And then to have to support a number of Band 5s has been incredibly difficult. It's also been hard for those Band 5s coming into the service and not necessarily getting the supervision or the quality of supervision that perhaps they would have done in previous years. So that's had an impact. So we looked at how we could mitigate some of these issues. And within Lancashire and South Cumbria, since COVID, speech and language therapy leads have met together weekly for peer supervision, and that's formed a really solid foundation for trying to progress some of our workforce challenges. This relationship has enabled us to write a workforce position paper, which was presented to all chief AHPs across Lancashire and South Cumbria, And one of the recommendations was to fund a secondment post, which was an AHP development lead role, to really embed dysphagia education within our region. The funding was actually came from the Integrated Stroke and Neuro Delivery Network, which is why the logo is there. And it was a collaborative funding from each trust that's listed on that slide. So each trust actually put a pot of money, some money into the pot to fund that 2-year secondment, which is pretty unique, I think. Or it was at the time before the ICBs came to being. So I was fortunate enough to be successful interview for this role. I've got a background of being a speech therapist, but also working across lots of different areas of speech and language therapy, and also a managerial background. So I was head of speech and language therapy for University Hospitals of Morecambe Bay for 7 years, and that was the post that I was seconded out of. So when I first came into that post, it was very much around scoping. So how are we as a region currently delivering and supporting competencies? What are the numbers of staff that needed to be supported? And what was the planned recruitment over that 2 years of the secondment? And also engaging speech and language therapists from across the region. So speaking to SLT clinical leads. I've worked in this region for a long time, so I did have a lot of those foundational relationships. But this was a new project, so it was about engaging them and engaging 5 trusts from across Lancashire and South Cumbria to make sure that we could deliver this as a project. And then looking at the delivery, so taking all of that into account, how are we going to deliver and support and provide supervision for the Band 5s that needed it? So this was our mechanism for delivery. The underpinning document is the RCSLT 2014 Dysphagia Competency Document. Our enabler was a digital staff passport. So this had come about as a result of COVID, and allowed me to work on any acute site in any of our 5 hospitals within Lancashire and South Cumbria. And we'd engage in a collaborative with Manchester University with their dysphagia module that has been in existence for some time, but was being really underutilised within Lancashire and South Cumbria. So our Band 5s will get signposted to that dysphagia module as well. So as our delivery for mechanism, all of these things enable me to provide peer supervision sessions on any acute site. So I went to wherever the staff were, and we worked on their own acute site, but it did mean that staff could also come onto other acute sites to get a really rich learning experience. So those peer supervision sessions would be maximum of 3 staff in a session with me, and we'd be treating live patients. We also had some case study sessions. We also looked at mapping the experience that the Band 5s were gaining onto the competency document. We had some group teaching session looking at various topics such as dysphagia rehabilitation. And we also had some one-to-one sessions for staff that really needed that to build their confidence in dysphagia. So evaluation. So I sent out a survey to mentors, service managers and mentees when my secondment was coming to an end. And we looked at what worked well, what didn't work as well, and what needs to happen in the future. And there were 16 speech and language therapists that were supported during the 15 months of the secondment, which is not an insignificant amount. 14 of those took part in peer supervision sessions, and 2 had one-to-one sessions with me to build some confidence. Some of the comments were really positive. So the acute shadowing sessions made me feel more passionate about dysphagia and using my reflections to guide my practice. Ongoing support through what Helen is doing will be really beneficial. So some staff started to talk about the sustainability of this model. Been really positive to step back from that responsibility when there are other pressures. So that's around staff members feeling that they could give over some of that supervision session to me, some of that mapping to me so that I could do that. It was never about me signing off competencies, so I very much worked through mentors within each individual trust. But it was about taking off some of that burden from them and feeling that there was somebody coordinating that support. The Blackpool Victoria, that was one of the trusts, were extremely grateful for all the support provided and found the trainee SLTs found the time with me invaluable. So that was really positive. My reflection has been that there were things that could have been done differently. So certainly moving forward, it needs to be somebody that's very embedded clinically. My secondment took me out of clinical work, so I was just providing the training. I did have 23 years of experience, so that didn't worry me particularly. But going forward, I think that's really needs to be key with this role. So some of the strategic intentions. So how are we going to sustain this as a model? So I have gone into another job now, and we have recently employed two people actually to finish off that secondment. So 6 months left in that secondment, and we've employed 2 people to actually carry that on. So that's really positive. One's got an acute focus and one's got a community focus. I've written a strategic paper around the sustainability of this as a model of care, a model of education, and that's gone out to everybody within Lancashire and South Cumbria for their comments. And that strategic intention is also around the changes to pre-reg dysphagia competencies and how we're going to manage that within our region, given the impact for student placements, and also ensuring that our graduates are workplace ready, or can be enabled to be workplace ready when they come into post. Also considering how we support paediatric dysphagia within that as well. I've collaborated with all the local HEIs to try and understand how they're going to deliver the pre-reg competencies. Lots of them are talking about having simulation, doing simulation sessions and having in-house clinics. So there's a real sustainability intent around this, and we're very, very supported by our chief AHPs in our organisation. So I hope that was useful. I have had a number of colleagues nationally get in touch with me to say that they're doing similar things, and how have we evaluated this, and I think that will be really useful nationally to look at how we evaluate these posts. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Helen, and sounds like a really big project with lots of collaboration, so great to hear about all of the details within it. Thank you. Rosalind, are your presentation slides working?
They are.
That's lovely. In which case, I will hand over to you as our next speaker. So our next talk today is from Rosalind Gray-Rogers, who's going to share with us your experiences as speech and language therapy students developing eating, drinking and swallowing competencies across placements. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It leads on really well from what Helen's been saying. There's so much we could learn from that and apply it as well. I'm presenting obviously on behalf of Dorothy, Orla, and we want to acknowledge our students who've really participated fully and also our amazing placement educators. The context is that Northern Ireland is a very well-defined region for lots of reasons, but geographically it's particularly tight. And that means that we've had very close sustained links between the one university providing SLT, which is at Ulster, and the NHS here is the HSC SLTs. We're really benefiting from very strong leadership from our regional HSC SLT managers, and they work very closely together with each other, but also across the region. There is, and it's quite up close and personal, despite the politics, there's very positive engagement between the government, workforce planning, the university. We get a lot of support and feedback and intelligence from RCSLT's Northern Ireland office and ourselves as university SLTs. The Ulster team at Ulster has been very proactive currently and historically with regards to RCSLT work streams, and particularly over the last few years with the dysphagia EDS work. There is also in Northern Ireland a very powerful enhancer or driver to service improvement, which is the regulator, the RQIA, for service improvement. And what that means is that in essence, I have never known such an unprecedented emphasis on eating, drinking, swallowing. In the last 5 years, it's been everywhere. There has been a region-wide 5-year focus on EDS with under the umbrella of Dysphagia NI, multiple work streams targeting all sectors. That includes everything from restaurants currently to caterers to different levels of workers within residential homes. The RQIA as the regulator has really driven a lot of work with the recommendations and they're both their stick and their carrot, with the intention to reduce the risk of choking because of critical adverse incidents. At Ulster, for lots of reasons that aren't pertinent here, but we wanted to build back in 2018, build on our EDS content. And we actually built in a target of 100 EDS clinically focused hours into the design. And we enhanced again our EDS knowledge and skills. The recent initiative that has driven this pre-reg initiative has come from this last one, which is now named as the Northern Ireland Post-Registration EDS, it's a bit of a mouthful, Workforce Development Programme for SLTs, which launched last month. A little bit more about that is important because it provides the context. It was set up by the Chief HP Officer back in 2021 to address the EDS workforce shortage that we've just heard about. There were SLTs in post that were not EDS trained and were waiting too long to access training. And so what this project group did was the aim was to develop a sustainable regional mentoring and training model to support post-reg SLTs. And the Chief HP Officer had 2 co-chairs of this project group, Lorraine Coulter, very experienced SLT manager in Northern Ireland, and myself. The outputs from this 2-year programme was that last month a flexible online learning programme for EDS therapists in training, which we have called EATS, for EDS therapists in training, both paediatric and adult, okay, post-reg, they can avail of that with a learning log to be completed. There's also a clinical log of hours, and that's an agreed form that captures both the amount of hours, but also their mapping, so the individual EATS mapping to how they've developed the competencies. And we needed, as part of this project, to actually have a regional agreed competency tool, which is referred to as the CT-EAT, and all post-reg EATS need to reach threshold on this. So we need to look a bit at that model because it replaces the traditional 5 days post-basic course, the last one of which ran last year. And the competency tool itself was developed bottom-up, top-down through an activity audit and analysis with existing competency sets. So this is the tool and the information that we have at the front of it. And at the bottom of this in blue, really what we're saying is that when this tool came online, when it was implemented and it went through a testing phase, obviously, the partnership group, which is the Ulster University and regional SLT managers and placement leads, agreed in June last year that this post-registration tool should be adapted to be used by pre-reg SLTs in undergraduate study and their practice educators. So that was a year ago, and there was reasons behind this. And the reason behind it was we would be able to track the development of EDS competencies during the pre-registration clinical journey in a way that made sense to the future managers and mentors of these students as they graduate, if they take up work within Northern Ireland. And so the goal was to explore whether it was feasible for it to be used pre-reg. And the idea would be that students would emerge from Ulster, they would transition more seamlessly when they went to become an NQP working in Northern Ireland, and very quickly would become an EDS therapist in training with an assigned EDS mentor, because they could avail of that online flexible learning programme. And this very much supported the big drive to have a much more EDS workforce ready set of goals. So when we looked at this and thought, how can we take this post-reg competency tool and apply it pre-reg, we needed to be very mindful that we as a university are required and want to and are working to demonstrating students' acquisition of the 16 out of 20 RCSLT competencies coming from the pre-reg 2021 document. So more about the competencies themselves. There's 28 in total. 6 are applied across referral, assessment and intervention. 2 are specific to referral, 5 to assessment and 3 to intervention. And I appreciate there's not time for me to go into them here, but this would be the sort of structure. And the referrals are 7 to 8, assessment day 9 to day 13, and intervention then 14 to 16. Now we needed to think about pre-reg, what judgments would we be asking practice educators to make on the competencies, and we use the scoring, as you can see there, 0 to 4. And what we wanted to know at the university was, is it possible to meet all of the competencies? We didn't think so, or whether emerging judgments was more realistic by the end of the student's course. And we had the benefit, because we were putting this in place a year ago, we've been able to capture information in order to reflect and learn before we actually make anything mandated. And because we were doing this, we wanted to know a bit more. We wanted to know what was the impact of the clinical placement model, and how did the amount of EDS clinical activity vary. So basically, did our restructuring placement work? Did the 100 focused hours take place? Are there any patterns emerging across the programme? Is there any difference between paediatric and adult placements, for example? And what was the degree of agreement between practice educators and student judgments? There are 2 others where the data is so rich that we're taking a lot of time to actually work out how best to capture it. And it's around the learning activities that the students have captured in their own learning logs. So we gathered data. We have 4 blocks at Ulster at the end of the first year, second year, and then 2 in the final year. All students recorded their clinical activity using this adapted clinical hours log spreadsheet. They mapped the clinical activities to the development of their EDS competencies using this CT pre-reg. Placement educators completed it at the end of each block placement, this competency form, and this was in addition to the normal summative assessment. This in no way was summative. The information we were gathering was to really gather and reflect and learn. Second and third year students self-rated themselves. So what have we learned from our data? And in a presentation like this, we can only really give you a flavour of it. Like a lot of courses, we're obviously capturing the amount of total hours and sessions across the course. We're incredibly, well, it's not luck, it's a bit more than that, it's very strategic. In Northern Ireland, we have got placement providers that are providing 177 sessions on average across the 4 placements. And that is 88 adult and 89 paediatric. So that exceeds RCSLT's 150 clinical hours, and we'd built in a percentage there. In the final year, the total average clinical activity is 330 hours, of which 96 are EDS. So for the first time, we have been looking at what is our final year EDS proportion. and it's 29% of the final year clinical activity. We were able to look at second year, not from the same cohort, but last year's second year, and their EDSRs from their adult placement were 58% of that clinical activity, and the mean there was 99 hours of EDS. So our conclusions here are that the model has been successful in EDS experience, and that we're seeing a growing amount of EDS experience in second and in third year. In terms of patterns emerging and the degree of agreement, if we just have a look at that quickly. So you've got some data here. This was the PE's final year judgments. You've also got the year 2 adult practice educators judgment there. So the way it would go, looking at pediatric, which is the very last block in final year, and adult, which is in semester 1 in final year, we're seeing that of the judgments that the practice educators are making, that pediatric, the pediatric block, that students, 14% of them are meeting the competencies from that pre-reg 8, with 36% achieving them in, or being judged to meet them on the adult block. Very similar in terms of maximal and minimal support as it divides out there. But what is interesting is the ones that are not applicable in terms of the pre-reg competencies. The second year ones we're seeing there, that there is a trend, as you would expect. It's nice to see that developmental trend going from maximal to minimal support that is then also picked up in that adult placement. The final year students themselves, when they judge themselves at the end of their placement, what we're seeing there is a bit of a difference in terms of pediatrics. There's a similar pattern in terms of what they have met, although that's a very low percentage, but they're much lower than the PEs with regards to the adult block placement. So in essence, the judgment as to having met, even with minimal support, still would not allow us to say that students can pass if we were to use this as our tool. And this is when we drilled down into the competencies, was there a pattern in terms of the competencies? And overall, the competencies were different that weren't met, i.e. they hadn't been able to get the experience to meet them. We're seeing that there was 4 rated as not being met. If the adults, 4 with the pediatric, but different. Equally, what we're seeing is that going to the bottom of that there, that this intervention one effectively implements, evaluates, and modifies therapy techniques, was not met. It wasn't, they didn't have the experience in order to meet that. So what we were seeing was that, as we find students say all the time, intervention is very hard to get the experience in, and yet we all know that that's what we're doing. The reflections and the future here, and I do apologise that we're not delving into the detail more, because it's fascinating to see the patterns. We want to further explore exploiting the opportunities for student on placement regarding EDS to create the opportunities to develop them. We want to also follow our class of 2023's development as Band 5s, those that are in work in Northern Ireland, with the new post-reg workforce EDS development programme. That allows us to look at that transition and see how seamless it is or not, and how ready are they or not. We want to analyse the clinical activity data from students, because that will also lend into number 1 there. And we also want to build clarity regionally as to what are the expectations of a new grad emerging from Ulster regarding both the EDS type and level of support that they would need. And this is very much aligned with the RCSLT work that is emerging very strongly in this area, and will do in particular over the next 12 months. We also want to capture the longitudinal data because we're following, for this next academic year, we're following our first and second years as they transition through to build up more of an understanding. Thank you very much. We're really delighted to have any questions at all about this, copies of the competency tool, etc. Please don't hesitate to ask for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosalind. A lot of details on the hours that could be achieved and the experience gained there. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yes, I would echo, please do put any questions in the Q&A box. We should have time at the end of the session to pick up any questions that come in. So thank you so much, Rosalind. Okay, and finally, we're going to hear from Kathleen Graham from the RCSLT, talking to us about pre-registration eating, drinking and swallowing difficulties. Over to you, Kathleen.
Thank you, Caroline. Can I just check? Finally, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Phew. Thank you. Thank you all for your patience today. It's been fraught with technical problems and definitely reduces my anxiety that AI is going to take over the world. So my name's Kathleen Graham. I'm a Senior Project Manager at RCSLT. One of the main projects that I have been working on is the pre-registration eating, drinking and swallowing competencies, and that's what I'm going to speak to you about today. A little bit of background to the project. So in 2021, Health Education England, who are now WTE, funded the development of pre-registration EDS competencies, with Bev Harding having this really key to what she wanted for the future of speech and language therapy and the recognition across the profession that this needed to happen. What we wanted to do is to develop a workforce fit for the future, which incorporated EDS into the pre-registration curriculum, with our overall objective being that by 2026, all students will need to achieve the competencies to graduate. So we formed a working group with clinical and academic representation across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. The pre-registration EDS competency framework has 17 knowledge competencies, which are taught at a HEI level. Then there are also 20 practical competencies. Of these 20 competencies, learners must achieve 16 of these with double sign-off. So on 2 separate occasions, they must be seen to have demonstrated that competency. Overall, they have 60 hours contact time, with a minimum of 10 being with paediatrics, 30 being with adults. The remaining 20 can be direct with adults or paediatrics, or can be more self-directed study. So we completed a gap analysis of the knowledge competencies to see within the HEIs in 2021 and 22 how their curriculum and how they were teaching against the knowledge competencies. Here you can see there's quite a large percentage were actually achieving those, so 76% of the competencies were being taught against within a curriculum. So we're around about 3/4 that were being taught there. When we looked at the practical competencies, we saw quite a big difference here. So as opposed to that kind of 3/4 that was being achieved, there was only 43% who were achieving the practical competencies at that pre-registration level. And you can see that kind of the next sort of 16% were working towards that, but there's quite a big chunk that either weren't achieving or we didn't have any data for. They didn't incorporate that in the returns. And if you compare the knowledge competencies with the practical competencies, you can see across this that there's a huge difference between how much is being achieved in the knowledge section versus the practical section. So one of the remits within the funding from Health Education England was to incorporate simulation within the pre-registration competencies. So some of us might think simulation is, high-tech HoloLens, 4D versions of anatomy and physiology. And it can be much more simple than that. It's a technique that can replace or amplify real life experiences where it's immersive and it evokes or replicates a situation of the real world. And that can be verbal, it can be a standardized patient, it can be part task trainers, computer patients, electronic patients. And within speech and language therapy, we've actually done this for a very long time. We have had lots of standardized patients, we've done part task trainers where we've carried out parts of assessment and then learned how to build that up with learners into a holistic session and session plan. So what I wanted to understand is technology enhanced learning / simulation based learning. So those are kind of two similar things. So technology enhanced learning is a way of carrying out simulation based learning. Is it as effective as practice based learning in achieving the pre-reg competencies? So I carried out a systematic review to try and understand what the evidence was saying out there. As you might be aware, there's not a huge amount of information within this. There's a lot within physiotherapy, which has got some really nice indicators that students perform really well within this area, and that it increases their knowledge, it increases skills, increases their confidence in carrying out different practical components. So of the 5 studies that we found in the systematic review that were relevant, these were the main 5. Now, most of them are coming out of Australia, which has quite a high reputation for using simulation, particularly within paediatric dysphagia. Okay. There were no studies that completely compared achieving dysphagia competencies through either technology enhanced learning or simulation and practice based learning. There were 2 that compared simulation based learning to traditional teaching methods, so more kind of classroom based teaching methods. And they found that knowledge, confidence, preparedness all improved, whilst the anxiety of the learner significantly reduced. So we could cautiously start to think about replacing some practice based learning with simulation. So I met with our several working groups, our pre-registration HEI working group, to try and understand what it was they wanted out of simulation, what were the requirements. And this is what I got from them. So it needed to be accessible. Everyone needed to have access to the platform that it was shared on. It needed to support the practical sign-off of the competencies, that it was an optional tool, so they didn't want it mandated in any way, but something that they could either dip in and out of, or they could incorporate depending on what they were already doing within the curriculum. They needed something that took up minimal time and input from a HEI perspective. All of the HEIs have invested a huge amount of time and effort into putting the pre-registration competencies into the curriculum. So in terms of the simulation, we really needed that to be something that was easy and ready to go for them. It needed to address our RCSLT goals of equality, diversity and inclusion, and it needed to look at adults and paediatrics. And that reverts to that previous point around having set hours with paediatrics and set with adults. Okay. So looked at several options, did an options appraisal of what was going to work. Within kind of the limitations of the project, we decided that an e-learning, so a technology enhanced learning approach, was going to be the best option for us given the scope of the project. So we recruited a working group of clinicians, academics and students as well. It was really important to get the student voice heard within it. We developed a case history form or a facial assessment and swallow recording form that could be used within the e-learning. And we developed clinical scenarios and best practice management as well as assessments. So the e-learning consists of 2 adult cases, so a gentleman with Parkinson's and one with dementia. I should mention these are trained simulation actors who have simulated the conditions. Due to governance issues, we weren't allowed to use service users with lived experience of these conditions. 2 paediatric cases, 1 adult assessment and 1 paediatric assessment. I've just taken some screenshots here of what you can expect within it. So we have got lots of videos, lots of interactive tools, further reading, knowledge checks within it, close-ups of what the swallowing assessment entails, the case history, the orofacial assessment and the swallowing assessment you download, and you can practice them while you're seeing it. You can repeat the videos, you can play a section several times to see what it is that you're actually seeing. Okay. So of the 20 competencies, you can see here that the assessments 1 and 2 signed off several of those competencies. What we have agreed is that none of the face-to-face competencies can have a double sign-off from simulation alone. So whether that's technology enhanced learning or simulated practice, for the face-to-face competencies, you need to be able to have at least 1 sign-off with a real live client. So what do people think of it? So on the whole, it's been really positive. We're continuing to monitor it and look at if it's an effective tool, if people would like us to develop it further in the future, to add more case studies to it. It was released around about March. So far it's been launched 719 times with 173 active users. And how are they using that? So within practice-based learning, so for some practice educators where the university isn't using it within teaching modules or within simulation, they've used that to support practice-based learning. So for example, for a block, the learner could be with you 5 days a week for a month, and actually they're only with you 4 days a week, and the other day a week they're working on this. They come to you and ask you questions and how you can evaluate their clinical thinking, say what is it from the case studies that they want to learn more about. So then within the HEI learning or guided activities, within self-directed learning, so we've had a lot of students who've seen it and just wanted to go for it. We've also had some post-registration SLTs who've wanted to use it to support their post-registration competencies. Now, it doesn't provide sign-off in the same way that it does for the pre-registration competencies, but it is a useful additional learning tool for them. So what's the future going to be like? We need to evaluate its effectiveness. And we want to make it accessible to a wider audience. So if we can look at a more global audience, particularly for countries that have reduced access to dysphagia or EDS training opportunities, this could be a real opportunity for us to share the best practice that we have in this country. We'd also like to update and add to the number of case studies and assessments, and that really is dependent on future funding. It's held on the Learning Hub, which is the slightly newer version of e-learning for health. So everything that's on e-learning for health is eventually going to migrate onto the Learning Hub. If you search pre-registration, eating, drinking and swallowing, this is what will come up. Feel free to have a look at it. If you're a student, I would kind of say, with some caution, just check with your HEI to see if it's going to be incorporated in your learning at a later date. But for anyone, please go and have a look through it and see what you think of it. Please provide feedback as well. That would be really appreciated. Finally, a huge thank you, and I couldn't name everyone here because there were so many people who were involved in this project, from the lead authors who developed the pre-registration eating, drinking and swallowing competency framework, all the way through to all our working groups, our student users who did so much testing for us with it. It wasn't possible without any of you. I just want to say thank you for listening. Please email me if you have any more questions about it that we're not able to answer today, or you want any further information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, and thank you again to all of our brilliant presenters. I know we have had technical problems today, but I'm sure everyone will agree that all of our speakers have delivered some really interesting topics, really calmly in light of technical difficulties, and in such detail that it gives us a lot to think about going forward, so thank you. We have just over 10 minutes for some questions, and I have seen some coming in on the Q&A. One that's got a few likes, I think you just answered, Kathleen, which was where the e-learning was available on the RCSLT website. So I think that's now been covered. Lots of really positive comments about discussions about recruitment and retention ideas as well in the comments section, so please do have a look at them if you've got time. Question for Rosalind. This came in early on. Do you feel the graduates will be workplace ready? And do you use a framework in the workplace like we still intend to in England?
Thank you. I think that the graduates will be, and in fact our feedback is that they are workplace ready, but the challenge has been with the new pre-reg EDS competencies, there is a yet unknown, that if all of the competencies are embedded pre-reg and that the knowledge, all those 16 out of 20 met in terms of the competencies, what will that graduate look like in terms of entering the workforce? What will they need? And that question's still not answered, and it can't be answered until we actually look and explore our own graduates going in as band 5s and get feedback from employers, from managers, and also from themselves. Definitely they will be more EDS ready, depending on when they actually start work. I mean, what we're seeing is a pattern of shortages, but we're also seeing a lot of temporary posts and people moving around. So like anything, skills disappear very quickly when they're newly acquired. And so it depends on how quickly people transition into a more permanent workplace, supported right from the get-go. Framework, we will use RCSLT's framework when it emerges. Absolutely, it's critical. Absolutely, we're waiting for it. Our project really had to have legs because of the local regional drivers that I mentioned in the presentation.
Thank you. And another question that's come in, are there any perceived disadvantages to acquisition of communication competencies with a higher percentage of clinical hours in dysphagia management for students? Have you assessed students' perceived confidence in communication?
Absolutely, and I also think too that it's a myth to assume that if you are working with EDS clients that you're not having to develop, frankly, rather sophisticated communication skills. So our entire curriculum design is around that any client that our students look at, regardless what umbrella it comes with, whether communication or EDS, that they are required to look at that in the whole. So EDS is embedded into how our students think right from week 1, semester 1, year 1. When we look through, and when you look through the competencies in more detail, you'll see that actually communication skills are embedded throughout them. That doesn't mean that we're not also concerned though to make sure that students get proper experience with communication, with clients who've got communication needs specifically. And we've now put into our block requests that they also have got to have protected sessions with communication focused clients.
Thank you very much, Rosalind. I believe this question may be for Kathleen. How do you see the implementation of EDS competencies at pre-reg at an MSc level with the limited time available?
Thank you. So we've been working with a lot of the HEI. So for the 2-year master's programs, they won't need to start. So it'll be the cohort start in 2024, who will be the cohort that graduate with this. So all of the programs have been working really hard to think smarter, I think, about their curriculum. And I think it addresses the question that Rosalind had there as well, that we see people as a whole. You know, we do not see communication or dysphagia very often in isolation. Quite often it is paired together. So if we see someone, for example, with Parkinson's, we can be working on both of those aspects. So it's really key that we integrate both of those things and not draw out EDS as something that is very separate and needs to be done by something else. It's everyone's responsibility, and hopefully that will improve better care for the service user at the end of it. Within the HEI, so whether it be the apprenticeship, the degree, the part-time degree, or the master's, been working really closely to kind of audit and see how their current placements will facilitate achievement of these hours. And we're pretty confident that they will. What we've also done is set up regular check-in points across the courses to make sure that, you know, we're not leaving it to last semester of your second year of your MSc to see if you've got all your competencies there. That actually it should be a lifelong learning thing. It should be throughout the duration of the course. And I think these hours aren't in addition to the practice-based learning hours. They are incorporated within that. So within the placements that people go to, we want them to be seeing people with EDS difficulties within that.
And another follow-up question, is the e-learning being used in Scotland?
Yes, access throughout the UK. So that was one of the fundamental points, was that it had to be accessible in all of the nations. So anyone who works in healthcare or in social care can access the Learning Hub. Also, all of our students can access that as well. If you cannot, for some reason, please email me and I will be able to sort out access for you. There is also as well, sorry to butt in on that one. So there is also a project that's going to be starting sort of imminently in Scotland around reviewing all the resources that are available there around dysphagia. So kind of consideration of this will be one of the aspects of that.
Can I just come in there? I have to say, for RCSLT to deliver with Kathleen's leadership, these fabulous, absolutely fabulous e-learning cases is incredible. Both the time span that you've taken, the very limited budget that you had, the quality of what has been produced has really, really, I think, been a key transformational piece for us in universities. We really embrace these resources. Thank you.
That's lovely to hear. Thank you. I've had one more question come in. Is there more specific competencies around the learning disability cohort? Previous competencies were more outpatient paediatric based to increase confidence of the students and staff in working with those disabilities who have more complex presentations that may not be able to be simulated in controlled environments.
Is that for me? Sorry, Caroline.
I think it is, yeah.
Okay.
If I got that wrong, please do correct me in the chat and I can redirect it, but I think it is for you.
Yeah, this was something that when we were setting this up, we really wanted actual service users to be part of this. And it was a huge compromise to have patient actors within that. I do think if we have more time and hopefully the resources in the future, what I would really love to do is have actual service users there, particularly people with a learning disability and around observational assessments where you might not be able to get as much information from the service user themselves and you might have to gather that information from other people. So trying to understand that kind of complexity of the situation. So yeah, I completely take that point on board. We also had to, within the financial restraints that we had, we could only have the 4 case studies and 2 assessments. And there is a huge gap there within learning disability and also within head and neck cancer.
Thank you, Kathleen. We've got a comment and then a question from someone who has their post-registered dysphagia qualification, been out of the workforce for 4 years, just embarking on return to practice hours. Would it be recommended to undertake the e-learning to refresh their knowledge?
I think it's a really good starting point. We've tried to incorporate the most up-to-date evidence that is available within it. What I would say is that we've just started the process of reviewing the 2014 Dysphagia Competency Framework. So it's likely by the end of 2024 that the new Dysphagia Competency Framework will be published. So the old 2014 one, it will look very different to that. It will align with the Professional Development Framework. It will also look at how the pre-registration competencies fit in on that continuum. And what we really want to do is get away from the dysphagia trained or not dysphagia trained. We are a continuum of our knowledge right the way through from, you know, the person who's in a community clinic who sees a child that there are some red flags coming up about sensitivity to certain textures, all the way through to that consultant level speech and language therapist. So I would say if you're returning to practice now, yes, use the e-learning resource. You will still be using the 2014 competency framework. You won't have to upgrade to the new competency framework. No one is going to have to do that. Okay, but yeah, it's a useful tool to get your head back in the zone.
Lovely, thank you very much. I think that's all the questions that we've had in. Yep, so thank you so much everyone for joining today. If any questions do occur, you can contact the speakers. Link is on their biography and the agenda, and you can send them a message there. Thank you again to our presenters today, and thank you all for bringing such interesting questions as well. We have a break coming up now before our keynote speech of the day.